Not long ago, far from this remote region of northeastern Alberta, the world awoke to a dawn of crisis. Our way of life, our way of progress into the future, was suddenly being called into question. The age of cheap, abundant energy was closing. Well, we are looking down at a possible partial solution to the crisis. Down beneath the trees, beneath the muskeg and the overburden, reaching from horizon to horizon, lie the legendary Athabasca tar sands. For centuries, men have marveled at the sands, wondering how the tar got into them, wondering today how they could get the tar out. In September 1973, Alberta's Premier Lougheed appeared on television.
But I am pleased to inform the people of Alberta tonight that 3 days ago, an agreement was signed between Syncrude Canada Limited and the government of Alberta to proceed with the second plant on the government's terms.
That announcement marked the culmination of much more than one company's plan for resource development. It meant that at last the time of the sands had arrived. We've all heard about the tar sands. Here they are, this great reservoir of oil which someday, somehow, would be tapped. But I wonder if we really ever understood what the tar sands really are. There are approximately 600 billion barrels of oil locked in Athabasca's tar sands. 5/6 of that is too deep for mining, but the remainder is more than all the conventional oil reserves left in North America. The Athabasca tar sands cover about 10,000 square miles in northeastern Alberta. Syncrude is not the first to move in here. Shattered dreams. The woods around Fort McMurray are full of relics left by others who came before. The history of getting tar out of the sands has been one long, humbling experience. Hundreds have tried. No one has ever been entirely successful. 200 years ago, in 1778, Peter Pond becomes the first white man to see the tar sands. 10 years later, Alexander Mackenzie recorded the first known use of the tar. He watched Indians caulk their canoes with it. About the turn of this century, the rush began. Surveyors mapped the sands. Politicians expounded on them. Entrepreneurs flocked to Fort McMurray. Dreamers, con men, stock promoters all had their day. But among them were a few dedicated scientists and businessmen. By 1930, the Fitzsimmons plant was fully operational, producing bitumen for car roofs and road surfaces. In the 1920s, this man, Dr. Carl Clark, working with the Alberta Research Council, began work on the basic hot water extraction process that Syncrude plans to use today. In 1930, the year the Fitzsimmons plant opened, Dr. Clark made an exciting and prophetic statement.
When petroleum becomes sufficiently high-priced, the bituminous sands will come into demand as a crude for manufacture of motor fuel and other petroleum products.
The time of the tar sands. Do we have an energy crisis? Either the crisis is real or it isn't. Demand sharpen, prices go up and down. Suddenly tar sands development becomes a viable proposition, even an essential one. If we have lots of oil, with or without the Arabs, Are we still running out? What about the long term? The man on the street gets confused.
People in the street should try and find oil and must find how difficult it is, for example, to drill up on the Arctic Islands. The Merck platform cost Imperial Oil $7 million. The well cost them $3 million. It simply is not easy to find oil. Great Canadian oil sands in the years from 1969 to 1972 had lost $50 million in producing 59 million barrels of oil, almost $1 per barrel. The demand for oil by the year 1990 will have reached 3 million barrels a day in Canada. The supply from conventional crude plus the planned tar sand plants will be only 1/3 of that. We have a 2 million barrel a day gap, and there is no way in which we're going to fill this gap. My feeling is that the tar sands offer the world a long-term assured supply of petrochemical feedstocks. Produced at a rate of 1 million barrels a day, they will last for centuries. They will be costly, but much less costly than to replace these same complex organic chemicals synthetically.
Until now, you got oil by drilling a hole in the ground. Here, you've got to mine the stuff, dig it out, and process it. You've got to keep on digging year after year. The oil in this stuff will cost more because it costs more to get it out. Syncrude spent 15 years and $50 million just deciding whether or not to go ahead.
Our basic problem with the test pit is that because our early drilling indicated that we had to go down 200 feet, we had to go down in 2 major steps with our dragline. On the way down, we started to encounter unpredicted water sources. These water sources were under extreme pressure and could have potentially caused slope failures. So we had to go in around the pit and depressure all of our workings. This water is mildly saline in origin and probably comes from an ancient sea. This, together with the basic digging difficulties in the tar sand, has caused our test program to go from an estimated $350,000 to approximately $4.5 million.
We are at a coal mine in Kentucky, one of the few places on Earth where you can find a drag line this size. Syncrude will have 4 like this, costing about $20 million apiece, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Between them, they will mine 13,000 tons of tar sand an hour. The scale of the Syncrude project is almost incomprehensible. But here in Edmonton, 250 miles south of the mine site, men have encompassed the whole thing, analyzing every single detail. 10 years of planning included a complete scaled-down pilot plant. Dealing with tar sand, mining it and extracting oil is not a particularly difficult thing to do at this level. But you up the scale to 300,000 tons a day and try to make it pay. There's nothing essentially new about the proposed mining techniques. The basic extraction process was originated nearly 50 years ago. The only problem is how to be first to do it successfully.
Well, in frustrations, there's no dearth of those. They almost matched the challenge. Anyone you talk to in the research group will have any number of examples of frustrations, from equipment that wears out too readily to materials that won't separate properly or won't behave in the way you would expect. But the real interesting thing about that is that when something doesn't behave in the way you would expect, it's a frustration, but it's also an opportunity. If you can see what's happened, what's going wrong, it may present an opportunity for a new process or a new approach. So the frustrations are not without benefit too.
The McMurray Formation, I think, has 3 members, a top, a middle, and a bottom member. And we have found that the top of the deposit processes not as well as the bottom of the deposit. My own research found that the top of the deposit is much more desirable oil from a point of view of making saleable products.
Tar sand is basically a gucky mess. Let me kind of simplistically suggest that if you took a cupful of dirt and sand, put in about, let's say, 2 tablespoons of molasses, drop the temperature of that down to right around the freezing point, you've got something that's similar to tar sand. As you can see, some of the oil will automatically stick directly onto my hands, and our prime purpose in life is really to get that molasses back out of that sand-dirt mixture.
We start with what every other refiner considers as being not very desirable. They use it to pave the roads with and, you know, make asphalt.
The process that we are using is the very simple flotation process. Again, in simple terms, if you can think of it as a jar full of tar sand in with hot water, stir like a son of a gun. Hopefully that heavy sand will drop down to the bottom and the froth will go up to the top.
This is the way tar sand looks when it's recovered from the mine. It's a solid material, a mixture of the bitumen and sand and traces of moisture. And if the sand grains were the size of pebbles, tar sand would look like this, with the bitumen in the spaces between the grains of sand. One of the problems in recovering the bitumen from the tar sand is that the bitumen itself is heavier than water. And that's seen when one pours bitumen into a beaker full of water. To make the extraction process work, we have to break the bitumen out of this mixture, and we have to attach air to bitumen to make it float. We do that by creating a slurry, adding hot water and steam to the tar sand itself. Now, this slurry then is introduced into a primary extraction cell, where the sand sinks to the bottom and is removed, and the bitumen floats to the top, where it forms a material we call froth. And this froth has in it some traces of moisture and mineral that have to be removed. It is removed in the froth treatment step, and a relatively pure bitumen is produced. That bitumen looks like this. It's a black, thick material. It's so thick that it's not possible to pipeline this material. It has to be upgraded on the process site. The main upgrading process will take place in what's called a fluid coker, which looks like this one, which is under construction on the plant site. Many things will happen in the fluid coker, but essentially the heavy black bitumen, we broke it down to prepare a final synthetic crude oil that looks like this. That's the final product that goes to conventional refineries for conversion to products for the consumer market.
Fort McMurray. Here more than anywhere, perhaps the real effect of Syncrude's development will be felt. You can talk about oil, about dollars, about the energy crisis. It's all very vital and very easy to forget people. McMurray is a nice small town right now. Good place to bring up kids. In a few short years, McMurray will be a city supported by a vast base of tar sand plants, and later on perhaps by petrochemical industries. What will happen? How do people feel about the future? Syncrude held a forum to find out.
Of the intent here, we want your active involvement in our planning so that we attempt to avoid creation of problems by their recognition early in the planning stage of our project.
Have you people ever done study on the environmental conditions that life in the north has upon the human element?
You're saying let's leave the biological environment out of it for a minute. Let's talk about the social and economic environment in Fort McMurray as a place for people to live.
Whenever you go from a small town to a larger municipality and then to a city, there are always a number of people who have resentments. I came here to Fort McMurray in 1957 when there's somewhere around 1,000 population, and all of those people I knew personally, and I would see them perhaps at least every second day. Some of those have stated to me that it was so much nicer when it was a small town, and we don't like all of these people coming into our town. That same thing will happen when you go to 25 to 30 to 35,000, but that is progress.
I just like small towns. People are more friendly, and it's not, everything's a little easier going.
I just like it the way it is now. I think we'll be out. We'll probably move when it gets too big.
If she's unhappy, then this makes the man unhappy. He does not work as well. If she doesn't like the community, she may not get him to leave immediately, but eventually she will get him to leave.
It's probably the best town in the world right now. No, it's a very challenging town. It's on the verge of a great boom again, and with it you have all types of people from all walks of life, and it makes it very exciting.
When you have up to 4,000 construction workers just descend upon one municipality, it certainly has a great impact.
The word is that construction people are rougher. Whether they are or not, I don't really know.
You just wonder if someone has a master plan, if someone is really organizing it, you know, what is going to happen to the town, to the people living here.
Syncrude's job is to produce oil from the tar sands. And part of that job is to place Terry Garvin in Fort McMurray as Community Relations Officer.
The concern that Syncrude does have right now is what happens to the man and his family in the community. And not just only that, but what is the influence that Syncrude can have on other people who are already here in the community. Syncrude will assume responsibility for trying to respond to concerns that do affect other people in the community other than their own employees. There's about 10,500 people here now. With Syncrude's involvement in the secondary service industries that'll come into Fort McMurray, should expect that it'll expand to about 25,000 within the next 4 years.
There may be a recession elsewhere in the world, but it's not going to happen in Fort McMurray.
Oh, more people come up. More girls for these guys.
Well, it seems that the women follow the men, so I don't think there's any shortage.
Like go skidooing, and in the summertime you can go swimming down the river, and skating, and go to show and all that, and a bunch of other stuff.
I think when this community expands, I think that it'll be fine because it's going to be young people. This is a young community. We have young people here. You can't afford not to be involved in things in the north. You have to be, because the months are just too long in the wintertime. And if you don't get out of that home, then you do have a chance of becoming very bored and sometimes mentally upset because you are in a situation where you can't relate to people or get out of a boxed-in feeling. There's lots to do, but people don't come knocking on your door and inviting you to do these things. You have got to get out into the community and do these things yourselves.
There are hundreds of square miles of open spaces around Fort McMurray. Plenty of opportunity for the town to expand correctly, given the chance. 25 miles from town, work is well underway on the Syncrude project. The area to be mined has been cleared, the site drained. Hundreds of construction workers are hard at work on the huge processing complex. At the peak of construction, over 4,000 men and women will be at work on the site. The labor force will peak out at over 4,000 before the job is done. I'm standing at the corner of what will become the world's largest open pit mine. It'll run about 5 miles that way by about 3 miles that way. 8,000 acres to be dug out, 200 feet down in 25 years or so. It sounds gigantic, and it is. Syncrude's Lease 17 is only a small fraction of the Athabasca tar sands, and the mine itself a small fraction of the lease. It's hard to believe that something so small on the map can have so much effect on Canada's economy.
In the construction phase, you're looking at an expenditure of roughly $2 billion. Now, Syncrude is unique because Syncrude has a tremendously high labor input. You can spend $2 billion on many projects and not generate nearly the job activity that you do in Syncrude. You start with people about 7,500 in number at the top of the construction phase, then you move to about 4,500 people directly involved in the operations. Then you move out and find that these 4,500 people give rise to a multiplier so that you can have
as much as 40,000 people directly dependent upon Syncrude's operations as it goes down the line. In respect to the material that goes into Syncrude, much of it will be made in Canada. Much of it is ordered from Ontario, from machine shops and manufacturing facilities. We are in an energy-short world, and we're in a world that is finding energy increasingly more expensive. So that the extent to which we can generate our own energy sources at reasonable prices, and I think Syncrude falls into that category, means that we're better off as Canadians, and that our economy is going to be better.
I guess really the biggest challenge that we face, though, at Syncrude, we talk a lot about the engineering problems, the engineering challenges, and they are staggering. But there's also a very real human challenge too. Syncrude is a human community. It's a group of people trying to do a job, not only an engineering job, but trying to be a socially responsible corporation, trying to operate in the full glare of publicity, trying to work with the community in Fort McMurray, trying to respond to people's needs in housing and recreation and culture, trying to cooperate with government in training and hiring native people, trying to protect the environment. And I don't think any corporation before has ever undertaken such a heavy load of commitments and obligations as Syncrude has in the course of this project.
20 years ago, a company could have dug the biggest hole in the world with environmental impunity. We need oil. To get it, it is necessary to intrude upon this 7,000 acres of subarctic bushland. But this company chose to be concerned about the ecological consequences of what they do before they do it.
In the environmental area, we're concerned with 4 major problems to determine what is here in the first place before the construction takes place. And Syncrude has been involved in studies of this type since 1962, of one type or another, monitoring, for instance, the quality of the water in the area. The second phase is during the construction and during the operation of the plant, and that is monitoring the effects of the construction and the effects of the operation upon the environment. The third one is, during this period of time, to plan and do the appropriate research to make sure that we will be able to successfully reclaim and revegetate the site. Development of these plans for reclamation and for the final dressing of the surface with vegetation, creating a diverse community of plants and animals, is ongoing. And the fourth area is to be constantly aware of any possible changes that we may not have anticipated, and to be able to respond to those appropriately without permanently damaging the environment. One of the myths of the North is that the North is teeming with wildlife, and this is not true. The farther you get from the equator, the less energy there is to create the kinds of communities that large animals use. The plains of Africa may have as much as 140,000 pounds of big game animals per square mile. In the northern part of Canada, on the tundra, it's down to 360 pounds per square mile, because there just isn't enough to eat. Now, the physical environment here is tough. It isn't the most favorable habitat for wildlife.
The Syncrude mine site will put approximately 6 square miles of this northern forest temporarily out of production. Our operation, therefore, must be supplemented with a comprehensive revegetation program. Following the diversion of Beaver Creek in this direction to the south, the initial excavation will take place in the central portion of the mining area. As mining begins, the sand tailings will be used for the construction of tailings pond dikes. After the 6th year of operation, when these dikes are scheduled for completion, the sand will be returned to the mine pit. By year 12, this center cell should be filled, and mining will be proceeding on either side of it. Reclamation of this area will then commence. The major objective of our reclamation program is to establish a balanced ecosystem. In other words, to successfully grow a variety of native plant species that will soon become self-supporting. In time, such a plant community will create a favorable habitat for other plant species and will encourage animal life to move back into the area.
We're rather the forerunners, and we're trying to develop new ways of interfacing with the government. And I think in Alberta, with the Department of the Environment, we've been very successful
new ways of interfacing with the government. U.S. capital comes into Canada to develop another of our resources. They seem to exhibit a sense of environmental responsibility, but what about financial responsibility? What's in it for us?
Syncrude, a consortium owned by 3 oil companies and 3 governments, is the largest joint venture between government and private business in Canada. The companies hold 70%, and the governments of Canada, Alberta, and Ontario hold 30%. And the government of Alberta has the option to increase its share of ownership in the future.
But in addition, the people of Alberta have an opportunity for a 50% of profits royalty arrangement, and then they also have the equity investment in the pipeline and in the power plant, so that the people of Canada will, aside from their 15% equity, will stand to get money through taxation, and the people of Alberta and Canada will stand to get money through direct participation.
So that down the road, of course, it would amount to billions of dollars, because we're looking at something in the neighborhood of $45 billion in total discounted cash sales.
Which is a tremendous sum of money, but this is a huge project, physically and financially.
The pressures that have been applied to tar sands development because of the current energy crisis put this project very much in the public eye. We're very sensitive to this.
We've got to be prepared to explain and justify our acts to the people, and this is something that's really quite unprecedented in corporate life in Canada.
I'm one of the lucky people. I'm the right guy, perhaps, but I'm in the right place at the right time. It's a very exciting place to be.
We develop new equipment. We develop new processes. It's just a paradise for mechanical or chemical or any other engineer.
And it's only as you become more and more involved with this project did you realize the immensity of what you're trying to do under probably some of the most trying conditions that an industry has ever been attempted to be developed.
There are about 56 billion barrels of conventional oil left in North America. Not enough for very long. We need the tar sands. We need to develop them now. We are to bridge the awesome energy gap ahead. For Syncrude, preparing to get going was a massive job, a massive investment in your future and mine. A future irrevocably linked to the black sand deposits right here in northern Alberta.
Across the sands of time.